YouTube? Doc's Motorcycle Service. Rawr, 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 rawr. Right quick, check out the Facebook page. That's all I got to say about that. Welcome back to the garage. YouTube, tell you what, man, we are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel with Hot Donna. If you just stumbled on this video, there'll be a little link right here to the series where we got involved in this 1986 Heritage Softail FLST and earlier in 2020, and ended up having an electrical issue, and then made the executive decision to tear it down to the frame and do maybe 85–90% restore on it to put it back the way it was, but still keep some of the cool stuff about it. And we've had a good time with this thing, man. We've delved into a lot of different areas. We've learned a lot about it. We've learned some patience. Service manual. Service manual, service manual, service manual. I can't tell you how many times I've preached throughout this whole series. Don't start one of these things until you have a service manual. This ain't Joe Blow on the internet or Doc on the internet telling you what the specifications are on your motorcycle and how it works. We're working on the rear end of the bike. Let's go take a tour of what we've got to put together, and then we're going to get started on putting it together. Come on, YouTube! So this is our wheel with our rim. If you're following along, you'll see where we went in and re-spoked this rim, and it's all tidied up and ready to go. But we've got to get the sprocket on one side of it. We've got to get the brake rotor on the other side of it. This is everything that's got to go on the back end of this motorcycle. Here's our final drive belt sprocket. This is the new chrome cover that we're going to put over it. This is the new chrome brake rotor that's going to go on the right hand side of it. Here we got our new brake pads for the caliper. This is our new Pro 1, the Rock Guard polish finish. And what that basically does is it replaces this piece here, and this piece basically sits in here on the back of the bike and prevents rocks and garbage and trash from being thrown up in here on the bottom of the oil pan or on the back of the transmission. Not going to worry too much about the shocks right now. Here is our polished rear caliper, and if you're keeping up with this, I'll put a link up here where we hand polished this thing. It was the original one. And there's also a video on where we rebuilt it. And here's the rebuild kit. If you saw that video, I used the old stuff in the caliper to put it back together to preserve the new stuff for this day. We've got our anti-rattle clips here for our brake pads. We have our caliper mounting bracket, and these being the old bolts, we've got new boots and new bolts to replace those, and we'll go over those as we put this back together. We have our new chrome hardware that's going to mount our new chrome brake rotor on. Now let's go look at the rear of the bike. This is everything that has to go up in here, and we got our final drive belt, we got our license plate tag, we got our axle, 2 spacers, 1 on each side for the wheel, and we have our axle adjustment pieces that go here, and all of that is going to go through here on the rear of the swing arm. Up here we got our swing arm balancing, our pivot point bolts that go through here onto the back piece here, and then all of this has to come up here to this hole and go over here to this hole. We have our rubber bump stops that hit the top of the swing arm here, but they screw in and mount right here. And I think, well, we also have our fender bracket up here and our chrome button bolts that we've picked up to mount here. That's where we're at. We need to put the caliper back together. I'm probably going to do that. I'll put a link up here to a caliper inspection and rebuild video. You can go there and take a look at that. But I'm going to get the caliper back together. I'm going to get the caliper mounting bracket rebuilt, basically putting some new bolts in that. I'll show you how to do that. We'll try to keep the video kind of around 20-25 minutes. May go a little bit long. I may not have enough for 2 videos to make them 20 minutes each. Might have to push it out a little bit. I know some of y'all ain't got patience. God gave a rock. But just understand, sometimes you gotta invest a little time in your education. All right, so let's get at it, YouTube. This is our caliper. I wanted to come back to this because something just occurred to me. This has been done for probably 2 months now, and it's been floating around my workbench. What you're going to have in your shop is you're going to have debris, whether you're vacuuming something, polishing something, painting something, working on wood, whatever. But if you go through this and you don't immediately rebuild it at that moment, be sure and take a moment to come back and look down in all of these holes and check them good with a flashlight and make sure there's no debris in there. Check down inside your piston, basically on anything that you're working on that you have laid to the side, okay, before you start putting it back together. This is your piston. This is your piston seal. Your dust boot goes on here, and then you have a small little snap ring that will snap around the boot and this to hold it in place. So go watch that video. I'm going to make this happen, and we'll be right back. This is our caliper mounting bracket. This is our old one. The reason we needed to replace this one was because we found a defect in it. There should be a little link popping up here somewhere with a link to that video. Watch it, it's informative, but it's something that you need to know about regarding your rear brake rotor and being on the lookout for any potential problems. So we ended up getting a new one of those. This is going to be a loose interpretation of how the system works, but with your caliper mounting bracket, your axle will go through here. This is the rear of your bike, and it comes through this way. This is your front, and your caliper will ride sort of like this on your bracket. And it's a floating system. And what I mean by that is when this is rigid and you apply the brakes, your piston will come out and go up against the brake pads and cause the brake pads to tighten on your rotor. So it floats a little bit like this, not quite that much. But what we discovered was the bolts or pins, this being your pin, this being, and your screw pass through the pin boot. Now, as you can see, this boot, and this is part of your inspection process, this boot is nasty worn out. You want to check this rubber to make sure it still has some giveness to it. This is the new boot. You see how flexible that is? This is hard, it's cracking, and more importantly, it's got a section missing out of it right here. And this is what passes through the mounting bracket down here. This one's dirty and nasty. It doesn't want to go in there right now. But what it does is it sits in here and it compresses. See it? See how it compresses right there? Decided to buy a rebuild kit for this, and we're going to talk about this for a minute. So with these new boots and your service manual, as you can see in the service manual, if you look over at number 2 in the upper right hand corner, that's our bracket. Number 6 and number 5 are our upper and lower pins. 7 is our bushings, or our pin boot. And all of these work together by passing through the caliper. If you look on the left side there, you'll see number 1, that's your screw. That screw passes through the caliper, passes through the pin boot into the lower pin. But I want you to take a look at number 6 as well. This is important. This pin here is smaller and shorter than the other one, and it also has a rubber boot on it. Now, I'm not sure, honestly, I'm not sure why it's made like this. I suspect that this rubber boot holds it in the caliper and doesn't let it move as much as this one right here. So we'll see how it works when we get into the operation of it. Your boots, and this is something important too, if you can see it, there's little lips right here. See where my fingernail is catching? Your boots are going to have to press over that. And they call these pin boots. And the only reason it's a rubber boot, it's basically an oversized seal, because you don't want contaminants getting down inside these holes. Because remember what I just said, these pins will be floating in there. They'll be moving in and out. Not a whole lot, but just a little bit. But if you get a contaminant in that, matter of fact, go back and look at that. If you haven't already looked at it, take a look at that caliper inspection and rebuild kit and all the goop that was inside here, because this ring had torn and it had allowed contaminants to get on the inside of the caliper body, but on the outside of the piston itself. And what that can do is it can cause it to hang up or get sideways in there and not work the way it was supposed to. Again, we're going to leave this boot on here. The boots are the same sizes, so we're just going to snap them on there, and you can see it's on there, and I can pull on it and it won't come off. We're going to take our little rubber boot, we're going to put it on our bolt, and there's a lip right here that we're going to push it down to. Now, I am not going to put any grease or type of lubricant on this. The reason I say that is because I really feel like this goes into the caliper mounting bracket, and this rubber boot holds it so it doesn't move as much as this other boot here does. Our shortened bolt goes in the top, and we're going to put this in here. And I'm just going to push it down. At this point, I'm not sure how far it goes in there, I'll be honest with you. I assume it's going to stop at some point, and that feels like where it's going to stop at there. There may be just a little bit more give on it, but there's also a lip here at the top of this bolt that this rubber boot sits on. So we're going to push it all the way down in, and then we're going to pull this rubber boot up over the top of that lip. Okay, so that worked out good. We're going to take this one off and we're going to put it on here. Now, before we get much further, I want to point out something to you about this. You'll notice that there's slots on the sides of these pins. If we take this boot off this old one, you can see that there's slots on the side of this. And that's so you can get a wrench on there. You have to, once you have this in and you have your caliper over here and you have your screw pass through your caliper that meets this, you're going to have to take an open-ended wrench and put on this and put this on here and tighten it down to specifications. And you get that information, guess where? From your service manual, service manual, service manual. So we got those on there. We got this here. We're going to press this one down. We're going to get it around the lip on the bottom. And you can just turn it to look at it and make sure that it is where it should be. But the important thing here too to remember is if you look at the side of your piston. You see how you have this little wallowed out spot right here on each side? These bolts need to lay in there like that. Can you see this? The flat side that you're going to use for your wrench, you don't want the flat side up against that, because if you do, you're not going to be able to turn it to put your socket on in order to tighten it. So when you go to line these boys up, make sure they line up to where the side of that bolt is sitting in that little wallowed out spot right there. What we're going to do now is we're going to lay this over here and match it up. And we're going to turn these sideways just like I outlined. So we got that one lined up now. This is our pad spring. And it's got a little clip. It's got a little line here on this side. And it's got a little lower clip here. What this does is it snaps down in here. Put your short end in first. There's a small groove down there. And then once you get it lined up, you just press it past it, being careful not to tear the boot, the dust boot that goes around your piston. We get to try to put all this together. And this is where it's sort of going to look like a monkey playing with a football. Because no matter what you do, and you can call this a tech tip, you want to put this together prior to putting it on the bike. Once it's on the bike, if you're doing a brake change, that's okay, because this is held in place on the bike and you're taking this off of it. But we got two moving pieces here, so it's going to be hard to manipulate both of them at the same time. What we have to do is get these abutment shims into each side of the caliper mounting bracket. And I'm surprised that stayed there. Because most of the time they don't want to see that. And they see I spoke too soon. There's that one. This one, they're going to have to fit in there, and they're going to have to stay in there while we are putting all of this together with the pads. This is going to be fun. They suggest using a little silicone to put on there, but I don't have any with me right now, so I'm going to try to skip that step. So what we may end up doing is showing you how to do this on the video and then taking it back apart and putting some silicone in there. We've got our new screws here, and what we're going to do is we're going to take this bad boy and we're going to lay it over here, and we're going to line it up, and then we're going to pick it up and we're going to look at this end of it. And remember when I talked about the slotted sides of these bolts and lining them up the way they should be? Well, that is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. They're just about perfect. I made just a little adjustment to that one. Is I'm just going to come in here and start these. So I got my hex on here. I'm going to run it down. I'm going to watch it, make sure that it's catching, line it up. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to get this one started. You want to make sure that these slots line up the way they're supposed to. Our service manual tells us that the brake tightening torques for the rear caliper screws 1985 and on should be set at 12 to 15 pounds. Double check that, double check the alignment, and I'm going to go ahead and torque this while it's out. 12 to 15 pounds of torque isn't a whole lot, but we ran it up, everything's matching up really nice. I'm going to put my wrench back on it, being careful not to mess up the boot, and give it a pull. Hear that? That one's right where it needs to be. Kind of hard to do without Linda here. Alright, she's braking. She's where she needs to be at. So there you go. She's where she needs to be at. Get these abutment shims and our pads put in, is get our shims lined up where they need to go, and then this one here is going to, and then we're going to set our pads in. So these little shims are giving me a fit, YouTube. They just don't want to stay where they're supposed to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this one more go, and all we really need is to get one pad in there, and the pad will hold them in. But as I get one in, the other one pops out. See if I can hold that with my finger right there. Then we're going to take our other pad, we're going to slide it down here, and that one's not really going to stay there until we get the rotor in. It's going to keep sliding out. So for all intents and purposes, this guy's back together. Yeah, looks good. Went together a lot easier than I thought it would. YouTube, I apologize. I totally forgot. This is a neat little trick that I learned a long time ago, and it never occurred to me to do it while we were putting this video together. Grab you a couple pieces of little cardboard. Might have to fold one, might have to make one flat, but they're nice little spacers to take up the room, the slack in here where your rotor goes. They're very useful. You can call it a tech tip to hold one piece in while you're putting the other piece in, and vice versa. So there's your little tech tip. Okay, so now we're going to move on. We're going to now, in the next video, we're going to move into the pieces of the rear wheel. Thanks for coming by the garage. Rate, comment, share it. As always, ride safe, save some money, and handle your business. All right, YouTube, I'll see you later. And